Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Dear listeners, before we get started, drop a quick hi in the comments and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have any suggestions for us to make the channel better, please let us know. Now let's start with the story. Imagine you're sitting at your desk at work, going through your list of tasks. Some can't be tackled right away because they'd interfere with someone else's job. One department was frantically preparing for a major multi-venue seminar day on Friday, so you stayed on standby in case any emergencies came up. You had 6 things juggling your attention, including filing returns from fingerprint background checks required for new hires and returning staff at public and private schools. That's where I was, trying to keep things under control on a hectic Monday. The boss seemed more stressed than he let on. He popped his head into my office and said, "That's it. You're done here." "Wait, fired? Just like that? No HR, no warnings, nothing?" I noticed his upper lip trembling. "That's right. You're an at-will employee. You're terminated effective immediately." Then he spun around and slammed his office door. Well, damn. I sat there, unsure whether to feel angry or just confused. He never joked like that. First thing I did was toss my iPhone in the trash. I sorted through my desk, packed up my things, changed my network and email passwords, sent an out-of-office message explaining I'd been fired, and shut down my computer. I spotted a small HP netbook leaning against a filing cabinet and slipped it into my box. I grabbed my toolkit, a bottle of Gorilla Glue from Supplies, a USB 3.5 gig drive I'd purchased for the company, but never reimbursed for the drive held the image for all the office machines. But that was their problem now. I loaded everything into my car, went back inside to grab my coat, jacket, and gloves, then said my goodbyes. At least a few people looked genuinely sorry to see me go. I informed accounting, who started the process for my countywide teachers' retirement fund. They agreed to hold my last paycheck rather than direct deposit it. Before leaving, I grabbed my drop light and a 3-headed contractor's extension cord from the server room. I noticed a standard flat-screen TV in the corner and, feeling a bit defiant, tucked it under my arm. I left my keys behind and walked out the door. What a slap in the face. I'd been paying over $1,000 a month in rent, and now I couldn't afford it. I had to find a new, cheaper place fast. I looked at my old Jeep. It was 14 years old, but recently had new brakes, lines, a rebuilt rear differential, a new battery, and a replaced high-voltage system. It should last another 30,000 miles or so, but it couldn't tow a trailer, something that kept nagging at me in the back of my mind. I'd seen some trucks for sale last fall out near a sod farm a bit east of town. I took a trip to see if they were still there. I found a Ford F-250 crew cab with a replaced driver's door and a primer gray paint job. There was no CD player, no tape player, no radio, no nothing. It did have a frame hitch installed and what looked like a standard trailer light harness. I was in luck. It was sitting in holes under the tires where it must have sat all winter. I knocked on the office door. A woman answered. I asked about the truck. It must have been a sore spot with her, because 20 minutes later I gave her a check for $800, as is. She agreed to help me get it to town. She got on a coat and boots, found the keys in a desk drawer, and took a ride out to the road with me. A jump got it going. It was a little doggy, probably because it had sat with that fuel in it all winter. Still, it ran. I followed her to town, where we got it parked in front of Walmart and behind an automotive battery and parts place. I drove her back to the farm and shook her hand. She was smiling, fit to beat the band. She must have really wanted to get rid of that thing. I drove back to town and tried the keys in the truck. Click. The battery was a crap. I paid $150 for a new one installed. It had less than a quarter tank of gas. I hit Walmart for a can of Stabil gas treatment, wiper blades, wiper fluid, plugs, plug wires, and a fresh tank of fuel. I also picked up a little pocket notebook and a pen. I'd be changing addresses and accounts furiously for the next week or so. I went home for a deep well socket set, installed the plugs and wires, and put on the wiper blades. It seemed to drive okay. The tires had tread, the brakes worked, and all the lights did too. The front end didn't shimmy any that I could detect. It got a cheap oil change and filter. I had a Road Warrior. Not bad for a morning's work. I registered the title at the DMV. The lady didn't want to believe me until I hauled out the receipt. She called the place and talked to the woman I'd dealt with. Yup, $800. When she stuck her nose out the window and looked at my Bondo, baby, she didn't argue anymore. I got my plates and title for $90. I found my Jeep's title and headed back to Walmart. I emptied the Jeep into the pickup, then drove it to Lou's Jeep and Eagle. I showed him the receipts for the work I'd had done, some $3,000 worth. He gave me $1,100 for it, as is. I catched a ride back to where the Ford sat waiting. I had a week until my rent was past due. A week after that, and the lawyers would start with the paperwork. I had to be out of town before that. I intended to be out much faster than that. I went to the bank to deposit Lou's check. Well, the owner's check. Next, I hit a Mailboxes Express/UPS store to get a service address. I had a few $1,000 available on my credit card. It was time to buy a place to stay. Down near South Chicago Heights was a storage yard that IDOT, Illinois Department of Transportation, the Tollway Authority, hauled all the stuff involved in collisions on Illinois tollways from the Indiana border to the Wisconsin state line. I had an idea that I might find a trailer there. I'd seen camping trailers at junkyards before. I took a little trip, hoping that I'd led the good life, and Lady Luck was feeling generous. There were cars on one side, trucks in the middle, and trailers on the other side. The stuff went back for years. There were a lot of burned-out wrecks, and some had police tape on them. I found a flatbed trailer full of small campers. I went to work at the office reading through the various files giving the dispositions and availability of the various lots. The paperwork said the trailer and contents that I was after had been sold for the insurance value. A wholesaler had been contracted to recover and sell off any remaining assets. That had been almost a year ago. It looked like the wholesaler had folded and the claim on the shipment got lost. I looked at the guy behind the counter. He looked like he might deal $200 for one of the campers. Cash. He smiled and held his hand out. I gave him a Miami handshake. Got any way to get it off the trailer? Sure. $50. Forklift. Sold. More cash changed hands. I was hooked up in 2 hours. The keys were with the paperwork. I opened the door to my new home and almost got knocked over by the smell. Jesus. All the foam rubber and the mattress had gone to hell while in storage. I pulled out all the crappy foam and the mattress. It got left on the flat bed. It had a queen-sized bed frame. I had a queen-sized bed at home. It sounded like a match made in heaven. There were tags and booklets everywhere. It was brand new. Why the hell did it have a dishwasher, but not an oven? It had a heater, air conditioner, mini tub, and a 2-burner gas stove. A microwave was mounted above the stove. There were two 12-volt batteries in a lockable low bay accessible from outside. A 20-pound propane tank was mounted at the front, protected by the frame that extended forward to form the hitch. What a deal. I was the proud owner of a Coleman camper, vintage 2012. I headed back to Walmart where I picked up a bag of shop towels, a few gallon jugs of water, a bucket, and a bottle of Pine Sol. There was a water inlet for a small tank, but no hose. I bought a food-grade water hose from the camping goods department and a few rolls of biodegradable toilet paper. While I was there, I thought that the little blue packets of holding tank deodorizer were a damned good idea. I sat around with the trailer windows open, airing the place out while I read all the pamphlets that came with the place. Figuring out how the gray and black water dumps worked was easy. I found out that there was a little bitty hot water heater under the bathroom sink. I wiped everything down with water and Pine Sol, then dashed the contents of my bucket over the asphalt at the edge of the lot. I didn't flush any wastewater that I didn't have to. I went into the store to find a manager, or at least someone that could say yes or no. I showed him my receipts and asked if I could stay in his lot overnight a few days. He gave me the okay and signed a form for me to leave in my truck window. I was golden. I bought a stack of dishwashing pans and headed back to my apartment, trailer in tow. I parked it on the street because I wasn't about to get into navigating it around their parking lots. The trailer's maximum cargo weight was just over 700 pounds. Hell, I had more than that in food alone. A lot got put into the dishwashing pans and loaded into the truck's back seat. I threw my mattress off balcony to the living room floor below, then wrestled it out into the camper and onto the frame. I was seeing spots after that. I wasn't used to hard work. Once I recovered, I picked out a couple pots, a couple pans, some dishes, cups, and mixing bowls. If it was made of cast iron, I kept it. I had some very nice Calphalon-lidded pots and pans. Those I kept. I moved towels, clothing, bedding, and shoes. There wasn't much room for coats. I had a little 8-inch pry bar and a hammer that I used to destroy the camper's dinette. I could easily cover the hole in the floor with some stick-down carpeting squares and a rug. The holes in the wall were negligible. I owned an Adirondack chair that was pretty damned comfortable. That took the place of the dinette. I moved my tubs of cleaning supplies from under the kitchen sink out to the trailer. My tool bags and power tools went in the footwells of the truck's back seat. They were pretty heavy, so I let the truck's suspension bear their weight. Next went the firearms, wrapped in a blanket. I had a couple of electric fans, one with a heating element. I filled all my empty water jugs, took a little propane camping lantern and a 20-pound tank mostly full of propane that the landlord didn't know about. If he knew about it, I'd have been kicked out in a New York minute. I planned to swap the currently empty tank with my old one so that I'd have heat overnight. After all, it was almost March around Chicago. Lots of funky white stuff was all over the ground and more was due. The weather was uneasy. Spring was still coming. Before locking up and leaving, I stopped and almost kicked myself. I took my camping packs, ready-to-run suitcase, computer, and my widescreen flat-panel monitor/TV. I didn't want to leave anything behind that I'd hate to lose. It looked like I was moving out, and several people had seen me moving shit around. I closed the drapes, locked the door, and headed back to America's playground. Walmart? Wally World? Come on now. I thought everyone had seen Summer Vacation. Before I filled the gas lines with potentially explosive propane for the first time, I wanted to put in a T valve and fitting for the oven behind the cabinet where the dishwasher was. The stove I was anticipating replacing it with would need the gas. This promised to be a long night. Walmart was still open. They had copper tubing, a pipe cutter, T's, valves, and compression fittings. I had solder, a torch, MAP gas, and an asbestos pad. I cut in the place for the T and sweat soldered it in place. Then I soldered a flared pigtail to the T and attached a shutoff valve. From there I fed the line down behind the counter to a springy loop behind the dishwasher and finished the end with a ring and compression fitting. It was ready to go. Hell, it only took an hour and a half. I made sure that my new valve was turned off. I swapped tanks, opened the master valve on the tank, and once inside, sniffed for the smell of gas. Nothing. I lit a burner on the stove. Poof. I had heat. Next I got the furnace lit and set the temperature to 60 degrees. I cleared all the shit off the bed, made it up with my bedding, and crashed hard. What a hell of a day. Well, I woke up in the morning and wasn't scattered all over the parking lot. That was a good sign. It was still pretty early, so I brewed up a cup of tea to go with a little bread and jam. Then I made some choices with my canned goods. Everything in glass came inside to keep from freezing. I arranged the cooking ware, dining ware, plates, cups, glasses, and bowls to my satisfaction. I had a little radio that I always carried in my suitcase. It came out to give me some background music. My running back and forth had charged the trailer's batteries enough to run the 12-volt lights. I should have pulled the electrical feed from the truck to the trailer the night before in case the battery charging circuit had no undervoltage protection. I could have pulled the truck's battery to near zero overnight. I had gotten lucky. I checked out the refrigerator. It was a floor-to-ceiling unit, maybe 7 cubic feet. The top third was a freezer. It was designed to work on either 110 volts or propane. I patted it fondly. It certainly beat the little dorm-sized refrigerators found in most small campers. I found a place in the trailer's external storage bays to hold the jacks, and a lot more such as lawn chairs and the water hose. The city power tap had a breaker box next to it, and a heavy coiled-up power cable. There was a pigtail back there to convert the cable's NEMA TT30 termination to US 125-volt NEMA 5-15R. What you see on the wall in the United States. The septic hose was stored in a hollow bumper with a hinged end cover. When the store opened, I purchased a pay-as-you-go cell phone and a 30-minute card. Back at the apartment, I looked up the bank's number and checked my balance to see if the check had cleared from loose. Not yet. I did a second run-through of the apartment, looking for things that I'd miss or have to repurchase. I kept screws, batteries, and little stuff in a two-sided compartmentalized case that I bought at a hardware store. I made sure to pick that up, as well as my big square sleeping bag. It made a wonderful quilt. I decided to get my spare propane tank filled, then took a trip out to Holiday Hour Camper Service and Supply. The guy that owned the place was an avaricious little scumsucker, but that was a known property. I could play off of that. I walked back into the parts department to see if I could deal. I had a brand new low-flow camping dishwasher with the full documentation package. I wanted a modular gas oven. I had wandered through the sales floor and found some comparable prices. I knew that even trading straight up, he would be getting a very good deal. I spent a while bargaining with the guy and finally got what I wanted, their best oven that would fit in the recess along with a $5 PVC cap and a swab of PVC glue to seal off the dishwasher's vent to the gray water tank. The stove slid right in as if it were made for the hole. I screwed in the gas fitting and plugged it in. I was golden. I then triggered the next part of my nefarious plan. I let him know that I had 3 more trailers just like mine available. They were legal, paid off by an insurance claim, and forgotten in the system. I offered to get him 3 for $7,000 each. As found, I let him know that the foam cushions were shot right up front. He hemmed and hawed, but I knew that I had a fish on the line. I slowly reeled him in. Coleman Campers. What do they sell for new? 17 now? 15 now at cost? How often do you make over 100% on a large ticket sale? Buy some advertising and lowball M to get a crowd in here. What else can you sell in a spring sale? People are bored to tears waiting for spring. Think of the walk-in traffic. He bit. I dropped off my trailer and headed into DeKalb, where I picked up the interstate to go southeast. By 6 that night, I was $21,000 richer minus $750 my cost. As he handed me the check, he said, "All right, you got your money. Now put me out of my misery. Where the hell did you find them?" I smiled. "I'd out Recovery Yard, South Chicago Heights." He looked at me for a minute, then grinned. "Damn, that's brilliant. There's always something to go around when insurance claims come through. Now for the final part of my plan. How would you like a 24-hour guard on this place?" "What I mean? I just got fired from my office job yesterday morning. I bought this truck, cleaned it up, bought my trailer, and just about cleaned out my apartment yesterday. I'm at loose ends and need a place to stay. What I say we work out a deal where I get a place live in my trailer while you get a night guard. Put in a remote gate alarm to run a ding-dong, and nobody gets in. What about sewer, water, and electric? You paying? Let's figure it out. Lot rent, for $100 a month. Electric, less than 50. Water, negligible. Same with the sewer. You already have insurance for stock and employees. It should actually drop your insurance if you talk fast enough. Now what's a security guard worth to you? He gave me the hairy eyeball. You're good. You hit a man where he lives. I'll pay whatever the insurance goes down by. Sound good? I held out my hand to shake his. Sounds amazingly good. I can live on that in my retirement. He had a couple concrete pads out back. I got to use one of them. The place needed one hell of a cleanup, but what else did I have to do? I put the trailer up on jacks and got it hooked up to sewer, water, and electric. He had cable TV on the sales floor. I'd have no problem hooking into that. I'd just have to wait until the ice melted to dig a little trench. I slept that night in my new home. It was between a cornfield and a highway. But hell, I was getting paid to live there. The next morning, I went back into town to strip everything I wanted out of the apartment. I took my sawhorses, then emptied the refrigerator and the freezer. The chest freezer was full, and I didn't have a place for the damned thing. I had 5 37-quart storage boxes, mostly empty. I filled them with all the food and put them in the back of the truck under a white canvas tarp to stay cold. I had room for a few more kitchen tools, and I took the measuring cups. I made sure I had all the bathroom stuff packed, then took a look at my books. Cookbooks, electronics, programming, all that. I need something to read. I took all the computer crap that made any sense to keep. Oh shit. I almost forgot the crock pot. I'd be eating out of that crock pot until I got the frozen food situation under control. Since I had an oven now, I could get some bread pans and frozen bread dough. Bread and stew would go over very well, and I could change it up enough to not quickly get tired of it. A lot of stuff was left over. I went knocking on doors, letting the neighbors know that it was open season on whatever was left. One little Mexican woman damned near picked up that chest freezer by herself and toted it off. All the glass cooking ware went, the casseroles, and the rest of the pots and pans. I kept one lidded white glass 9x9 pan for enchiladas and brownies. 2 guys hauled out the futon couch, and another family must have really needed a dresser badly, because that thing flew out of there, each kid carrying a drawer. The back bedroom had a whole wall of shelves where I'd stored stuff, and there was some heavy furniture up there. All the little pieces and parts for an electronics lab were stored in boxes and drawers. A heavy case of hand tools for electronics, and half a dozen meters was up there too. I had no idea what to do with it all, and it was such a shame to let the maintenance guys throw all of it in the dumpster. I called the number in the phone book for the Fox Valley Amateur Radio League that was in the phone book. I actually got a live person. I told the guy on the other end what I had. He was quiet for a minute, then asked me how long I'd be there. He said he had to get there from Aurora. I said bring a bucket of Popeye's spicy chicken and a batch of onion rings. I'll be here till midnight. I heard a laugh at the other end, and he hung up. I knew he'd be a while. I started down to the bank to deposit my check for the campers. Then I had a thought. I wanted to close that account. I wanted to get AT&T off my butt for internet. The only way I could see to do it was to close the account that they were leeching off of. I turned around with that check still in my pocket. Tate showed up with 2 guys in a panel van a couple hours later. They brought pizza, chicken, onion rings, and Pepsi. Good thing I'd left a few rolls of paper towels behind. These guys were builders. They saw the cores, the spools of magnet wire, the drawers full of caps, the voltage regulators, the op amps, and oh my god, the transistors. One guy looked at me like I was nuts. UG giving all this away? I shrugged. I got fired. No room. I'm moving into a 19-foot-long house trailer. Where the hell am I going to keep it? Tell you what. You got an old 2-meter that you're not using and a copy of last year's ARRL handbook, and we'll be Jake. You sure that's all? There's well over $2,000 in parts sitting here. I thought about it. I remembered my old loft apartment. I used to have an old dinosaur of a shortwave receiver that I ran on a long wire antenna. It had a band select, a frequency scale control, and a fine-tuning control. That was it. I used to have one hell of a good time with that thing. I left it on the high concrete step back by the dumpster in Wasco when I moved out. It was gone the next morning. I watched 2 of the guys quickly glance at each other. I had a good idea who snatched my old radio. Do you remember the label on it? Hallicrafter? Allied. I don't really remember. I don't think it used tubes because it didn't produce a lot of heat, and it only took but a minute to warm up. It did drift for 20 minutes or so after startup, if I recall correctly. It had a 6-band selector switch. It was good to get all that stuff to a good home. I gave them my new address for the handbook, and maybe a 2-meter. They waved and left. I looked around the place. There wasn't much left. I shrugged, locked the door, and left. I dropped the key off in the overnight slot. I went to my old job site to let the accounting department know my new address, the box at the commercial outlet dash. I didn't want any of those IMRF checks to get sidetracked. I still had time, so I went back to DeKalb to open a new bank account. I picked Castle Bank because they were local and there hadn't been a peep of any irregularity attached to their name. I put in my check for 20-odd grand, ordered my checks to go to the cutout address, and got a debit card right off the bat. They had internet banking, so I could check my balance occasionally. I thought that I might catch a few hours of work in the shop, so I bought a couple pair of dark blue coveralls and a pair of work boots with greaseproof soles. Farm and Fleet is a big store that supplies everything from snow blowers to veterinary medicine and injectors to household goods to shoes and clothing. It put me out about $80. I used my credit card for it. Back at the trailer, I packed the freezer with the best of the meats, leaving the cheaper stuff in the shipping crates that I kept under the trailer. I started a crock pot full of pork and frozen orange juice, then cleaned up a little around the back of the lot. I hooked up my widescreen and put it on the shelf provided for a TV. I plugged in my computer to the little flat screen that I had absconded with. It was an older HP triple core that I'd bought off of Amazon as a refurb. It had never given me a moment's trouble. It had more adult movies on it than you could shake a stick at, plus a couple big story archives that I'd downloaded over the years. I didn't have any TV, internet, or any other connectivity yet. The weather was packing in. I stepped outside my warm, comfortable trailer into a good 25-mile-an-hour wind coming off the frozen snow on the cornfield behind me. I instantly tucked my head into my collar and bent over a little. I squinted to keep the wind from making my eyes tear up. It wasn't 20 paces before my ears started to hurt from the cold. It made me realize how close I was to being homeless and desperately scrounging for shelter. I wandered over to the shop, trying to spot the cable TV feed without looking obvious about it. I shut the heavy door behind me, instantly warming up. I felt the higher humidity lick my skin and smelled the acrid odor of a braising torch in use. I heard shit. Goddamn, out of an open door. A big camper was in the service bay. I stuck my head in the door to see a pair of legs sticking out of the cabinet beneath the kitchen sink. I innocently asked, "What's wrong?" This plumbing just scalded me with boiling water while I was trying to patch a burst water line. That's what's wrong. I was glad he couldn't see my face. Been there, done that. You don't patch that shit, you replace it. That was just common sense. You want some help? I've done more than my fair share of fixing freeze-damaged copper. He pulled his head out of the cabinet and squinted at me. You shitting me? Nope. Come on over to look at the gas feed I patched into my stove supply line. Sure enough, he got up and followed me out. I handed him a flashlight and pulled the stove half out. Nice job. What'd you use? I used MAP gas and a standard torch, along with silver solder since that's what I had on hand. I set up a heat-proof pad behind the piece to protect the surface while heating it. He looked genuinely impressed, almost surprised. MAP gas can be a pain. It keeps sputtering and going out. Everything has its quirks, I said. It doesn't like room temperature. You've got to heat it up to about 110, 120 degrees. Then it holds solid. All right, genius, he said, starting to grin. How do I avoid getting burned by steam? Easy. Drain the fresh water tank. Open the fill valve. Open the final tap. Then use an air hose pressed firmly against it to blow all the water back into the tank. Give it a few more bursts to dry the line, and then you're good to go. I take it you've done this before. Interested in a job? I'm swamped with electrical issues right now. Sure. Deal. I shook his hand. I suppose it's too late to ask what I get paid? He snorted. Base is 10 an hour, on the time clock. Insurance? I hoped. Yeah, gotta have it in a shop. Great. I got my overalls and boots on, then punched in. I went to find him working with a meter and a rubber mallet. You want cheap and fast, or build the bejesus out of him? Just get it done. I nodded. Good. I'll need a roll of 3/8-inch copper tube and a handful of compression fittings. I'm not gonna screw with splits and splices. I'm gonna replace the runs. He grinned. I had 6 runs replaced within 4 hours, re-plumbing the entire trailer. I didn't even have to light the torch once. I pressurized the system and left it on the gauge. If the pressure held until morning, then the job was done. You do brakes? I replied, clackers or hydraulic. This one's fancy. Hydraulic. I shrugged. I've done it once or twice, long time ago. Better check my work, but sure, I'll try about anything. He slapped my shoulder. Good man. That weekend I met with the owner and Keith, the old mechanic, for coffee. Jensen asked me, how the hell did you get on Keith's good side? I usually toss him raw meat with a Nembutal in it. I poured myself a cup. Easy. He was up to his butt in alligators, and I took some of the load off of him. I'll bet all you ever do is pile on more work, right? Keith snorted. Got your number. Jensen just said, what else am I gonna do? It's how we make money. We chatted for a bit. Come spring, I'm gonna want to clean up back there. Make it look like a campground, not a dump. Then maybe we can put in a demo model or two back there to show people what it's like camping. Maybe find some brush and trees, cheap, for foliage. Whatcha think? Jensen instantly turned into a salesman. Good idea. With very little investment, we can have another sales tool. I continued. I could put out the awning and get a table, a fan, some chairs, and a chunk of that AstroTurf carpet. Talk to folks. Show them what Woodalls is all about. Maybe talk about KOA versus the state parks, national parks, and the independents. Help build up some enthusiasm. The guys were nodding. It snowed that night. Hun, that doesn't say much. Great big honkin' snowflakes drifted down like inebriated sparrows falling out of the sky. Then the wind picked up. All I could see of the building was a ghostly halo where the big light was over the repair department door. Biting pellets hissed down that rattled off the camper's shell like fistfuls of BBs for hours. The snow blew sideways while the wind rocked the trailer on its jacks. There was an airport less than a mile away. I promised myself to go over there as soon as possible to buy some big screw anchors and tie this trailer down to the ground. I didn't want to wake up on the ceiling someday, 2 miles down the storm path. I dozed, then woke. My clock said that it was near 6 in the morning, but you couldn't prove it by me. The wind had lessened, but I still couldn't see anything out the windows. How in hell did anyone get up and down that highway? I guess that the state police had shut it down. Winter storms on the Great Plains were sure different out away from the cities and towns. In town, you were sheltered by layers of buildings that blocked the winds and buffered the snow drifts. We didn't get him too often like places like the Dakotas, but we did get him. It finally blew itself out. The bright sunshine flaring off the snow crystals almost blinded me. I buled my way through the chest-high snow to get to the shop door. I got an overhead door open, then fired up the tractor. It had a front-end bucket hooked up to it. It took me over a day to dig out my trailer and truck, clear the parking lot, and clear the approaches to the highway. When things got back to normal, I spent $200 on 4 big ground anchor screws that would hold down a plane in a force 4 gale, and another $50 for 2-inch wide nylon straps terminated in big eyes. In a force 5 gale or a tornado, if you owned an aircraft, you just hoped your insurance agent was someone you could actually trust. It had been over a month since I was fired. My checks were all cashed. I closed out my old bank account. I had $4,800 and change, cash in hand from my old account. I left $1,000 in my DeKalb account, taking out about $20,000. I planned to default on my credit card. Hell, I couldn't afford to pay the damn thing off. Only my hourly pay by check and the retirement checks were going back to the bank. I was making about $750 a week, but Jensen had no problem paying me the bulk of my pay in cash. We both declared paying me $200 a month to keep the taxman happy. Since I was staying away from banks, I needed a place to keep all those bills. I found a 30-pound propane tank on the trash pile that had a blown valve. It couldn't be recertified with our equipment. I thought that it would make a fine stash. First, I cut it just below the seam with an angle grinder. Then I measured the height of a 20-pound tank and cut out the extra material. I made a brass slip-in collar and tacked it in place. Next, I smoothed all my cuts and got the top to slip down over the collar. A fresh white paint job made it look just like a run-of-the-mill 20-pound propane tank. I chained it, top and bottom, to the bracket holding the real propane tank. I started filling it with straps of hundreds. Keith had been around a while. I asked him if he knew anywhere I could pick up an ID that would pass an FBI inspection. He motioned me over to a little lunch table we had to one side of the shop. I used to have a younger brother. He died out west in a camping accident. They never recovered the body. He's been missing for 8 years now. I've got copies of all his ID. He was your color and about your height. You could pass for him in a bad light. I don't think he was ever fingerprinted, either. Well, I had, but the only people that had a copy was a bank that I'd last worked at over 20 years before. Would you have any trouble letting me use his identity? Nah. He was a good kid, but a little reckless. He'd have broken his full neck by now anyway. That's how I became Harry Rawlings. I spent some bucks getting my trailer and truck sold, then registered to the new ID and got a new driver's license. It would be a cold day in hell before the credit card company or the apartment complex found me. My only weak spot were the retirement checks. It was late March, and I'd finished off all the frozen food stored outside that I was going to. By now, the apartment complex, my credit card company, and AT&T were all after my butt. My old ID's credit rating was in a flaming death spiral, and I was happy as hell. Once a week, I called my old boss' private number and cackled like a fool into the receiver. I was making a little over $600 a month as a night watchman, not to mention my retirement pay and an occasional few hours a week working in the shop. I sat up late most nights, especially during the weekends, under an awning, sitting on a chair with a shotgun across my lap. I woke up late, had leisurely breakfast, and went to see if anything needed doing in the shop. I got cable out to the trailer without any fuss from the guys. When the snow melted, I used the ditch witch to clean up the old weeds and trash bushes. It's a big rotary mower that works like your everyday gas lawn mower, but it's 8 to 10 feet across, powered with a tractor by a 2-inch spinning shaft, and can obliterate anything that will bend to fit under the solid steel shroud. The trash pile got dug out and sent to the county reclamation site. When the temperature was high enough, I sandblasted the back of the building and repainted it. Paint sprayers are great, but cleaning them sucks rocks. I talked Keith into going halves on a little stacking washer/dryer pair so we could have clean coveralls every day. I just didn't tell him about my laundry getting done while I was watching the place. He no doubt knew and didn't care. That eliminated my last reason to go into town every week. The guys from the Shortwave Club finally came through. I found an ICOM 2-meter rig with a mag-mount whip antenna sitting on my outside table one morning, sitting on an ARRL handbook. What flabbergasted me was what was sitting next to it. An Allied multiband shortwave receiver and a decent pair of headphones. I guess that they got that HP 12-digit counter and frequency source working. It had been my pride and joy. I hooked the 2-meter up inside the truck and set up the receiver in the trailer. First, I had a telephone pole planted at the back of my trailer. I ran close to 60 yards of nickel-coated steel wire to the top of a telephone pole near the shop, and using both a ceramic strain relief and a lightning tap, I hooked it to my receiver. Then I did it again to another pole out towards the road, almost 90 degrees apart from the first line. That was one shit-hot set of antenna. I got India, Russia, Norway, Hawaii, Spain, Germany, and most countries in South America. I bought a charcoal grill and a 12 feet by 20 feet AstroTurf carpet for outside. Come spring, they had 4 more concrete pads poured to make it look more like a campground and have some different models on display. We had everything from little pop-ups with tent ends to a 5th-wheel trailer with slide-outs for a bigger living room. I wished for trees, but the tree gods weren't listening. I settled for a 24 red maple trees, 10 feet tall. I hardly left the property except to buy food, get a haircut, pick up my retirement checks, buy charcoal, and check on my internet sites. I took that little HP netbook to Burger King in the mornings to crib their internet connection. I'd been writing all this time. I published a few and sat on a few. I read more than I write. It's the nature of the game. Late at night and early in the morning, I listened in to see what the news was in Canada, Germany, and Mexico. Once in a while, I got something Asian, but I couldn't interpret it. I thought about learning some Spanish to understand what I heard. By May, the dandelions were going apes hit. The fields behind the store were harrowed and sown with seed. Keith was a craftsman looking for a shop. He'd been stuck doing schlock repairs for years. I convinced him to hire on a couple guys that would work for scale and charge by the book repair prices. When we found a couple guys that cleaned up the shop before they did anything else, we knew we had some winners. I helped Keith design and fit out a custom shop in a pole barn. He showed me what he could do while I worked as his apprentice. We stripped out the ceiling and interior walls of my little Coleman trailer and replaced them with thin oak paneling with a light cherry stain. It was gorgeous. I had before and after pictures of it. We put them on the wall behind glass. We bought an Airstream and refitted it. It looked retro, and it was beautiful. It sold for 6 times what we put into it. He taught me how to relax, soften, veneer sheeting, glue and press it onto the walls and ceiling, then form the jigs and braces to keep it solidly in place with the surface until it bonded. The jigs we designed were pretty funky looking, but they worked. I was bored. I went back to the IDOD lot to see what I could find. There had been a large multiple-car collision due to freezing fog and an ice storm down south near the Illinois-Indiana border, near Park Forest. Several box semis were involved. There were rollovers, jackknives, and end-on collisions. There was a solid 300 yards of yard space taken up by knackered semis. I carefully went through the trailers with a little generator and a cut-off saw to open the trailers. I believe that I was the first person to inspect the cargoes since the wreck the previous October. Nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted to take responsibility for it. Nobody cared. Jensen, it's Harold. Get down here to the IDOD lot with Keith. Bring haulers. We just hit the jackpot. It must have happened during the roll-up for the big spring Chicago outdoor show at McCormick Place. Brand new Airstreams. 16 of them. Sure, they had a few bumps and dents, a couple of broken windows, but who cared? That's what the body shop was for. I snagged an Airstream International 25-foot Signature Edition trailer for myself. It cost me $500. The mattress was still wrapped in plastic. I had a trailer worth as much as a small house for the price of a Portisan. Due to registration and recertification issues, we couldn't get any of the semi-tractors back in service, but we sure made full use of the cargoes. We went back for 2 months to remove brand new microwaves, stoves, air conditioners, mattresses, flat screens, heaters, hot water heaters, inverters, generators, refrigerators, and stereo systems from units with messed up frames. We salvaged a bit short of $1 million worth of inventory for pennies on the dollar. A scant few short pennies on the dollar. Jensen did a deal with Camping World to buy half of it for 50 cents on the dollar, wholesale. Even he was happy. He made damned near $250,000 in pure profit. The other guys even paid the shipping. I sold that customized Coleman for close to $22,000. What can I say? The guy liked the woodwork. I had to buy another Adirondack chair and another flat screen, because he insisted that they were part of the deal. I nearly doubled my liquid assets in one transaction. I pretty well retreated from talking to strangers for a while. Keith and I did our thing while Jensen kept selling and selling and selling. I didn't mind talking to customers, don't get me wrong. I just didn't make any friends. I was getting older, and by God I felt like it too. Keith came over to my trailer one night after work. He was distracted. Do you have a bottle to share? Now, never let it be said that I didn't have a wee dram held back for my mates. I pulled a bottle of Wild Turkey 101 out of the freezer. Keith smiled in true appreciation. Ah, lad, you've got a fine touch. We slowly proceeded to look for the bottom of the bottle. He finally got down to it. Lad, I want to retire and get a bit more out of life than the end of a RV store. Jensen's a firebrand and wants to do or die. Can you think of a middle way? Oh, Jesus. What the hell was I going to tell him? Bud, you hit me with a big one. I've got to sleep on it. I woke up in the middle of the night. I had a plan. Convert the site, sell off the inventory, hire a tough manager, expand the campground, build housing. What about trailer homes for bachelors and grad students that needed to focus their attentions on other school? The problem was the site purchase and site prep costs. 1, buy the property. 2, plan the development. 3, get a zoning variance. 4, get the sewer, water, and electric laid. 5, dig up the dirt, lay down stone and asphalt, put in street lights. 6, trailer park or subdivision. 1 lane or 2 lanes with curbs. Gonna need storm sewers and a storm runoff area in low areas. 7, driveways, concrete pads, service poles for the houses or trailers. This thing blew itself out of the water before we even got started. I had to stop eating jalapeno burritos before going to bed. No, wait. If we scaled it back to one U-shaped street and maybe 30 homes of mixed trailers and houses, it would work. As long as the lots weren't too small to be unattractive, they should sell. The easiest way to go was a gravel road. Upgrades could occur later, if ever. Screw streetlights. 1 retention pond would do as an outflow for any storm sewers. There were 440-volt lines running past the place, so 4,000 amps was feasible. It would need a power grid upgrade though. Water? There were fire hydrants near the building. We had water. Sewer was iffy. Pumping stages were expensive. I could see that this wouldn't be easy or fast. We bought the land about a mile east, just on the other side of Cortland. Cortland is one of those Achoo towns. If you sneeze, you'll miss it. The trees went in first rows of male cottonwoods that served as wind breaks and snow breaks. They grow like mad things. More red maples went in next to each pad for shade in a few years. The airstreams were just about handed to us. We had a gravel U-shaped drive put in, sewer, water, and electric run, concrete pads poured, and post office boxes put up. The zoning was a snap. We implemented 9 high-end campers. That was one side of the square. We laid out lots for 19 more. I reserved a pad on the back run, not on a corner. The pads were poured on one side of the street only, leaving the center a slightly depressed grassy area for drainage. Each lot was a 1/4 acre. Bushes and other green stuff like tall, decorative grasses were planted along the inner edge of the street and at the edge of the road to keep the noise down. Keith helped me paint my truck. Then he claimed one of the Airstreams, loaded it up, and bought a Diesel Ford F-350 to haul it. He took off down the road one summer morning. I watched the IDOT sites for more deals and took life as it came. Every couple weeks I took a trip. I made $9,000 for each of the first batch of Airstreams except for the one I kept. I ran out of space in my propane tank bank, so I made another. Jensen sold those 5 Airstreams for 10% off of list and cleaned up. He about pissed himself when the accountant told him how much his taxes were going to be. I asked him how much his charitable contributions were. His look obviously meant that he didn't give to any charities except for the Jensen James Retirement Fund. I told him that he should fund a grant at the college for sales and marketing. $1 million gift would mean a lot of goodwill in the community, and that was $1 million that the feds would never see. He was going to lose it anyway, so why not get it out there in a way that he could have some say in how it was spent? I gradually peeled off the surface treatments inside the Airstream, sanded the surfaces down, and applied thin oak veneer. Section by section, I replaced the black stick-on coverings with wood. A gentle sanding and a good coating with a dark polyurethane varnish made it gorgeous. Keith had showed me how to do large areas of veneer, and I practiced it. He also showed me how to glue up thicker tambours with a backing of linen cloth for longevity to fit a long concave surface. I was really thinking about covering the lining of the Airstream with wood, then oiling it. The trouble was there were so many edges and protrusions that it would be a monumental job. I did the bathroom door inside and out, and strip highlights high up on both walls. I took a fall continuing education course in conversational Spanish from the university in DeKalb. When the market dried up, even Jensen was convinced that the place was done for. He had a couple million in his retirement account. He sold off the place to keep from bleeding out for the insurance and property tax. When Jensen got down to the knife, I wondered what he was going to do with the trailer park. He told me, "Harry, I like you, but I don't like you that much." I grinned and shook his hand. Can't blame a guy for trying. It was early summer. I packed up, hooked up the trailer, and headed out on the road. I had close to $200,000 in my back pocket, a pickup and a camping trailer. I had to shell out some cash for insurance, but that covered me legally. I had $1,240.00 a month coming in every month from my retirement plan. There was a long road out there, and I was going to see what was at the other end of it. I used to think I was just passing time out here, one guy, one trailer, waiting for the next break or breakdown. But somewhere between digging up that airstream and building this little outpost of second chances, I stopped waiting and started living. Funny how that works. The salvage turned out to be more than metal and glass. It salvaged me, too, in a way. Now, when I walk the rows of old campers and rust-bitten parts, I see history, not junk. I see stories waiting to be told, just like mine. And even though I still sleep with one eye open for a good deal or the IRS, I've found a rhythm out here that fits me just fine. Not flashy, not loud. Just honest work, good neighbors, and enough room to breathe. I may not have built the big dream I once imagined, but I built something real. And for the first time in a long while, that feels like enough. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.